if we overspend for whatever reason, and then suddenly we're like, oh, well, I've already blown the budget for this week, so I might as well carry on. I'll go get this thing and that thing. So just be like, whoops.
It happened. We can draw a line under it.
Exactly. Like, don't be too harsh on yourself, and know that everybody does this.
Welcome to another episode of A Little Bit Richer, brought to you by my friends at Legal & General. Here to help us with top tips to trim your spending is a friend of the show, Charlotte Jessop. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I'm really excited to delve deeper into how we can trim back our spending. So first things first, let's touch on day-to-day spending. So can you share some ideas on trimming your spending when it comes to food?
Yeah, so I was reflecting on food shopping actually today, and I don't think there's any other part of our lives where you get this intersection where you are dealing with your finances, your health, and also your time management as well. Because when you go food shopping, you're looking for things that are going to nourish your body, but they also have to stay in budget, and they also have to not take too long to cook because you're busy. And this means it's like a really stressful part of our lives. So I think that we need to kind of be a little bit kinder on ourselves when it comes to food shopping. And yes, it is one of those things that we can control a little bit more with our spending. We have a choice about how much it costs, but also it is a mammoth task. So some of the things that I recommend people do are things like meal planning. So sit down before you go anywhere, before you even leave the house, sit down and decide what you want to eat for the week. And sometimes that sort of restriction about like what you're going to eat on Wednesday when you don't know what you're going to fancy on Wednesday can be a little bit controlling for some people. Actually, for me, I just like the freedom of going, what are we having today? Oh, look, we're having chicken nuggets and chips or whatever it is. So meal plan, and the benefit of doing this is you can think about what you need to buy. You can also think about what time constraints you might have. So I've got a couple of kids. They might have cubs or beavers one day or something like that. So actually, I need a quick meal that day. So if I go out to the shops and I buy something that's going to take 2 hours to prepare, that's going to sit in the fridge and go to waste. Whereas if I go, actually, this needs to be a quick in the oven, 15-minute jobby, then I know I've got that on the menu. So that really helps reduce things like food waste and keeps the cost down. Other things like just choosing your supermarket wisely. Some supermarkets are cheaper than others, and this is widely acknowledged. However, do a little bit of shopping around. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, you know what, that loo roll is cheaper in Aldi, and that's on my way home. So I'll quickly grab some of that, before I head back. I also do want to acknowledge that I live in Norfolk, and sometimes you don't get a choice about what supermarket you shop at.
Yeah.
So, if there's one there, you go there. You don't shop around. But yeah, I think, just being a little bit aware of things like the pricing. All the tickets these days have to have how much it costs per kilo or per 100 ml or whatever it is. So you can make a little bit of a comparison when you're in the shops itself. So you don't necessarily have to go for the first one you see, or the things on the end aisles might look cheaper, but they're not necessarily. They're just the promotions. So take your time with some of these things. I'm a big fan of having my shopping delivered, and this is mostly because I then have the freedom to sort of shop around and compare prices. I can do it in my own time rather than feeling the pressure of the little old lady behind me and wants to get to the baked beans or whatever it is. I can sit there and I can make my choices about what I want to spend my money on in the food shop. And one trick that I really like, and I use this when I'm doing my meal planning, is I will go online and look at the supermarket's pricing and go, oh, actually, what's on offer? Because sometimes chicken might be on offer that week, and that's a really good price. Whereas I was thinking about having, pork chops or something, but actually the chicken might be cheaper. So I can combine the two things and create meals around what's cheaper that week, rather than doing it the other way around, going, oh, I want pork chops. What's the best price on pork chops? So just sort of tweaking some of these things can help sort of shave off a few pounds off your food bill each week.
Absolutely. I think you gave some great tips there. I love, and I've been doing this for years. My parents taught me, like you said, when you look at how much it is per kg or per litre, because you can really compare, like you said, the prices may look cheaper, but when you actually break it down, you can see that. And I think one big thing that my dad got me into before I went to university, and that I still do today, and that he loves to do, is the yellow stickers.
Yes.
So, there's a certain point in the day, I don't know it, he knows it off by heart. He knows it off by heart, but there's a certain point in the day where your local supermarkets will, usually things that are going off either that day or the following day, reduce the prices of certain items.
Yep.
So my dad will often tell me, he'll be at home, I'm like, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to the supermarket to get the yellow stickers. He loves it. And it's good because, if, like you said, if you're planning meals, if you haven't prepped in advance, which sometimes we don't always have time because we're all busy,
Yeah.
he'll pop out and see, let me see what's there. Maybe you get a chicken, maybe you get another meat, and then you can build a meal around that.
Absolutely.
So there's so many different ways that you can bring down that spending, because it does feel like sometimes like everything's always on the rise. Like prices are just always going up.
Yep.
But there are things that we can do to kind of control that and bring that down.
Absolutely.
When it comes to treat spending, right? Because I think this is a big thing. We, as people, life is very stressful. Like I said, things are going up. Everyone's got their own responsibilities in their own lives. So we want to treat ourselves. You want to spend some money and treat yourself. But what are some ways that we can make sure that we're not just splashing the cash, but we're actually being a bit more measured with our treat spending?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I love to do here is actually predetermine what I want my treats to be, because we can get caught up in the moment and go, actually, like that person's doing that thing, that looks fun, and the whole FOMO kicks in, and that's not necessarily a thing we want to treat ourselves with. So I like to set a list of things that actually mean something to me. So I have various hobbies, like paddleboarding, and I like eating out, and I like travel. So I'm trying to make sure that if I am going to treat myself, it's on something that actually is meaningful to me, and I'm not just trying to fill in a gap and a an emotional splurge. But also budgeting that in, allowing that to be part of your spending. So many people that I see when they are preparing a budget, or they're sitting down there, they've got a spreadsheet or they've got an app, and they've planned out what they want to spend their money on. They remove all of the fun, and that makes it hard work to stick to a budget. Instead, if you allow some of those things to be in your budget, so if you want a takeaway, put a little bit of like a takeaway buffer in there. That's kind of, the point of life isn't just to sit in your house bored.
No, it's not.
So, put the takeaway buffer in there, or, eating out, or, travel, whatever it is. And then it doesn't feel so much like it's out of your control, because it's when you get that feeling of that, that sort of splurging, that's when things can spiral, because it's then, it's a takeaway, and it's a this, and it's a that, and what if I just buy, I'll get a new outfit, or I'll get whatever, and then it can spiral out of control. But if you set a budget, you put some limits around what you want to spend your money on, then it feels a little bit more contained and manageable, and still within your sort of confines of your budget.
I completely agree. And I think a lot of people find themselves, especially my friends, when they want to treat themselves and they haven't set it aside as like a dedicated fund, they'll find themselves dipping into their savings. And a lot of people tell themselves that they're going to put the money back. Like, I'll just take out £50, I'm going to put it back. And realistically, they don't do it. Yep. So to stop yourself from doing that, and stop yourself from feeling bad as well, I've had a treat yourself fund, that's what I call it, for ages now. So when I see something I like, I don't feel bad. I don't feel like, oh, but it's savings for my emergency fund, or this was savings for a goal that I had. This is money set aside to spend. So I don't feel bad. I can spend and say, okay, it's within my budget. I've got X amount set aside. I can buy this. Yep. So I think it is very important, like you said, just to factor that in. But you touched on something there, budgeting. So I want to come back to that. Let's talk more about budgeting then. So for anyone who has sat down with their budget and I said, right, I can see how much I'm spending, I can see how much I bring in, but this isn't going to work. I need to bring this down a bit more. What can people do when it comes to making more significant cutbacks to their spending and their budgets? Yeah,
so we've talked about things like food shopping. We've talked about those treats and cutting back and reducing those things. But actually, in reality, some of these things are just, you might save 10 quid, or like these are smaller tweaks. What we want to do is look at some of the more significant purchases we are making in our lives and see what changes we can make there. So I have a budget spreadsheet, finance nerd, and I I have all my outgoings, all my income. And what I do is I look and I'll highlight maybe a category on there. So it might be like my electricity bill, and I'll be like, I'm coming for you, electricity bill. And that month I'll work on how I can reduce that. And that might mean I switch my provider, or it might mean that I look at ways that I can reduce my spending around the house. Maybe I'll get some different light bulbs, I don't know. But that's my focus for that month, is reducing that price. And this can be all sorts of, look at those big expenses that we have in our lives, rent, mortgage, all of our utilities. Here is where we can make the big difference. So, things like if your mortgage is out of the kind of like your fixed deal, go speak to a mortgage advisor, speak to them and try and get a deal that maybe lowers some of those payments. Even in this time where we've got like really high, mortgage costs at the moment, it's still going to be beneficial to speak to somebody and get the best deal that you can. Things like rent, it might be that you need to make some serious choices about where you're living. Yes, it might be nice to have that extra bedroom, but is that something that you need? Or, is there somewhere closer to where you work so you can reduce some of your travel costs? All of these things are very much worth looking at and trying to reduce, because ultimately, like if my mortgage costs me less, I still get the same quality of life. I'm still living in the same house. It's just my mortgage is costing me less. So, and same with my electricity. If I manage to switch providers and I get a better deal, I'm getting the same electricity, but it's costing me less. So these are less about lifestyle choices and just significant financial changes, and they can make a real difference to your budget.
I think there's a key thing that you said there, is that to speak to someone. I find a lot of people, we've gone through this stage where a lot of things can be agreed upon online. You can subscribe to things, you can sign up to things, that we forget that we can pick up the phone and have a conversation with someone. I always say, so I drive and I have my car. Every year I do not renew my insurance or go with a new insurer without picking up the phone and see if I can get the best deal, because like you said, like with mortgage, rent, utilities, car insurance for me is another big expense that if I can get it down, that will make a big difference to how much money I have going forward. So it is just about having a conversation. I think people underestimate what you can actually get as a discount or a deal when you have a conversation with someone. So I think that is a very key one that you mentioned there. Just pick up the phone and speak to someone. And if they don't give you one, you're no worse off.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
You have nothing to lose. You are where you are. It hasn't changed anything. But if you get a deal, even better.
Absolutely.
Even better. Let's talk about controlling spending then. I have this conversation all the time with people. And I think often a lot of people have this consensus that, I'm just so bad at spending. Like, I'm just bad with money, because they feel as though they have no control over how they spend their money. So what would be some of your tips when it comes to actually controlling how much you spend?
I think you need to start with an awareness of what you're spending. A lot of people jump straight in with trying to just cut out like all unnecessary expenditure. And what there needs to be is a period of reflection. Like, what are you currently spending your money on? And I can speak to this because a couple of months ago I realized that there was certain areas I was like, how is this costing me this much? And so I reflected a little bit on where my money was going, and I'm shifting in my seat, because there was some like almost embarrassing there was some online shopping that came in at like £400, and it wasn't like I was like, oh, I have 400 quid's worth of stuff off the back of it. It was, where did that go? And they were like little trips down to like the local shop for like top-up shops, and that came in at about £400 as well. And I was like, this was not my grocery shopping. This was just, the odd like, we need a pint of milk and a chocolate bar and this and that. So I needed to start from the point of, well, this is where my money is going, and why is that happening? What am I not doing? So things like those top-up shops, I was like, well, what is it that I'm getting? What is it that I'm not getting on my weekly shop that I feel the need to go down to, little Tesco for, in order to, get every, couple of days? And then I was able to make a change to my habits. I was able to make a change to my grocery shopping and go, oh, okay, I need to buy more milk. I was like, I'm running out of milk. But if I just got 6 pints a week rather than 4, that's going to fix my problem. And then I don't have to go down the shop. So controlling spending isn't about completely eliminating some of these things that you're doing. It's about just having an awareness of why. Once you get to that place, you can then start making some tweaks. You can start making some adjustments. And that's when you start feeling a little bit more in control. So I don't recommend that anybody kind of goes cold turkey on changing their financial habits around their spending. Instead, just reflect, go through this period of understanding where you're at now and looking for areas where you can make improvements. And it might be that, like I allowed myself, for example, one trip down to the shop. And I was like, that's it. You can't go down there also on Thursday and Friday. You can go on a Tuesday and that's it. And then that change was enough to make me go, actually, I don't need to go anyway. It was just a little outing. I just wanted to get out of my house. And making those smaller steps is much better than trying to make one huge leap to something that feels a long way off. So know where you're at currently, know where your money is going, but also, just take baby steps to where you want to go. If you are trying to save, I don't know, if you want to get to a point where you're saving £300 a month and you need to reduce your spending together, well, can you try and save £20 this month? And, can you find somewhere where you can maybe spend £20 less and then save that instead? And those small steps eventually add up into something a lot more significant.
I think those small steps just feel more achievable and more attainable, and they keep you motivated on that journey, because I know if I sat down and said, right, I'm going to save £50,000 by the end of the year, that might be wildly unrealistic based on where I am and the circumstances that I'm in. However, if I said, right, I just want to have an extra £400 by the end of the year and I'm going to build that up as I go along, and if I have more money, I'll save more, then it feels more attainable and it gets you building up that good habit. So speaking of habits, I want to ask you, what are some good or positive spending habits? We've spoken about things to be aware of, but what are some good ones that we can make sure that we're enforcing?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to positive habits, having a budget, any sort of budget, is a great place to start, because this isn't just about your own financial awareness. It's about knowing what you have coming in, and income is just as important as spending, and you've covered that. So making sure that we're our income and our earnings, we know what money we have coming in, but also things like seeing where your money is going, knowing it's so easy to get those little subscriptions crop up. So having a budget that is all encompassing with your spending is an absolutely top notch place to start. The next habit that follows on from that is making sure that you actually bother to look at it. So,
that's a crucial one. Don't just make it and leave it. Make sure you're referring back to it.
I mean, you do not want just like a little spreadsheet that sits on your desktop for the rest of eternity. And you're like, I did that once. You're like, that's it. And you need to be able to check in with that. It needs to be a functioning document, something that adapts and changes. And the chances are, once you've sat down and you've done a budget, you'll go back to it and you'll be like, oh, okay, well, that didn't quite go to plan. Let's tweak that. I need a little bit more on maybe my going out fund and a little bit less, over here. And you make those changes. So having that spreadsheet or it can be an app, it can be, it can be a pen and paper. That's how my mum and dad do it, and it still works for them. Got a little notebook. Whatever it is, you have that and you do that. I think another one is to just have that kind of knowledge around your own, your own wants and needs as well. So when it comes to spending, I always sit there and go, I know I want this, but does it align with my bigger vision for myself? Do I want this, I don't know, do I want this meal out, because I can't be bothered to cook, or can I just shove a pizza in the oven and then actually that can go in my holiday fund because I want the holiday more than I want this meal out today. So just knowing what you're trying to achieve and having goals and being clear about where you're trying to head with your finances can really help you keep on track with your spending. And this was huge for me. I went traveling with my kids a few years ago, and that was literally knowing that we were going away and knowing that we needed some money for that really helped me rein in some of that, spending, that unnecessary spending potentially that it, we had this clear vision. We were like, we're going traveling, we need the money for that, so let's make sure that we get that, we're going to sacrifice that for this bigger vision that we had for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. I think having a clear goal, keeps you on track and just keeps you focused. Because you'd be surprised how many people I speak to who save to save or just budget to budget, but don't really have a goal in mind. So they find it hard to stick to it because of that. So it is just kind of having that focus that will keep you on plan or on track. But let's talk about when things don't always go to plan, especially when it comes to budgeting. So what happens if we budget for our week ahead, but as we know, life is unpredictable and that week just doesn't go to plan, so perhaps we overspend? What would be some easy ways that we can correct that and get back on track with our budgeting and spending?
I think one of the key points here is not to be too hard on yourself. If you're hard on yourself because you've overspent, normally that leads to further overspending. I've messed it up. When we see this, it's so easy to draw parallels with the world of like health and fitness. Like you have a cheeky muffin and you're trying to lose weight, and then you're suddenly like, oh, well, I've messed that up. I might as well have a McDonald's. And it's the same when it comes to our money. If we overspend for whatever reason, and then suddenly we're like, oh, well, I've already blown the budget for this week, so I might as well carry on. I'll go get this thing and that thing. So just be like, whoops,
it happened. We can draw a line under it.
Exactly. Don't be too harsh on yourself, and know that everybody does this. Like both you and I have sat
Absolutely.
in this room. We talk about money for a living, so we need to be aware that this happens, and it's not the end of the world. It's not a reason to completely derail yourself. So just be gentle, be kind on yourself. And I think then the next thing is to actually think about your budget in terms of monthly or longer term, progress. So let's say, you set a budget and, week 1 of the month, it all goes wrong and you've overspent a little bit. Take what you had budgeted for the rest of the month and actually spread that across the remaining weeks. You don't then need to go like, well, next week I've got to spend nothing.
Yes.
You just take what you've got and you get your calculator out and you divide it by 3 and spread it out over the next 3 weeks. And just, you might have to lower your, your standard of living for the next, couple of weeks. But actually that will get you back on track. And that way it's not so significant that the impact feels less because you're spreading it out over a longer period of time rather than just being like, right, I got to get back into this.
Charlotte, you've been incredible. You've given us some of the top tips that we need to trim back our spending and ace budgeting. But before you go, I want to ask you, what are your top 3 budgeting hacks?
So the first one is to just be gentle on yourself. We mentioned this already. Don't try and over restrict yourself. Your budget should be about creating freedom in your life, not about creating restriction. And you need to start from a place where you feel like you are going to actually achieve it. You don't want to set any rules in your life or cut back so much that it's not going to be successful. So that's the first one. The second one is I love to team up with my friends. So I had a neighbour, she's moved now, and I'm not going to hold this against her, but we used to team up on bulk purchasing. So, if there was a deal that was 2 for 1 on toilet roll or something, I'd be like, mate, I got you some toilet roll, and then we'd split the cost. So
That's great.
We were getting the benefit of the deal and actually seeing a reduction in some of our spending. And we also did things like we bought one of those laser hair removal guns.
Smart.
And we bought it. We went halvesies each, and because we lived opposite each other, I'd just go I need it back now, love. And we just sort of swap those sort of things about. We did have different heads on them. We're not icky. But some of those purchases you can things like pressure washers. We both went halves on one of those because we knew that we could share it. We didn't need it that much. So some of those things. Look at big purchases, even look at those little things like toilet roll, and see if you can share those between family and friends. Now, we started off talking about food spending as well, so kind of going full circle on this one. One of my favourite things to do is use food waste apps. So there are some examples like Olio and Too Good To Go, where you can either get free or reduced priced food. And what I love about this is not only the kind of like the monetary benefits, but also you're like helping the environment as well. You're stopping food waste. And there's a real sense of kind of like community, like your local cafes giving away cake or something. And it's just nice to be a part of that process and save some money along the way.
Charlotte, you have been an absolute gem on this episode. Honestly, so many tips that I'm going to go away and write down and start implementing from today. So thank you so much for coming on and blessing us with your tips on this episode.
You are absolutely welcome.